going to take a look at limits. So an example of a fairly straightforward limit question would be something like this. So this is like question 9a. So the limit as a tends to 0 of sine of 7a over 2a. Now with trigonometric limits, there's basically one thing that you need to remember, and that is the following. It's not in the log table, it's not anywhere, so you just need to remember this. The limit as theta gets closer to 0, sine of the angle over the same angle is equal to 1. And it's very important that the angle up here is the same as the angle down here. So in the same way, the limit as theta goes to 0 of sine of 2 theta over 2 theta is going to be equal to 1. And so as long as the two angles are the same, as long as the angle up here is the same as the angle down here, that limit is 1. If the angles aren't the same, we can't say anything. So what you always need to do is engineer a situation where the angles are the same, and then we work from there. So at the moment we're looking at sine of 7a over 2a. We need the angle on the bottom to be the same as the angle on the top. So what you do is you write that down. So sine of 7a all over 7a. And then, because this thing here is going to become 1, when we take the limit, this thing is going to be 1. What you need to ask yourself then is what do I need to do to this to make it the same as what I started with? So I'm not allowed to change what I started with. I can write it in a different way. So that's what I'm doing here. So looking at this, I have an extra 7 on the bottom that I didn't have there. So to get rid of that 7 on the bottom, I put a 7 on the top. And the other thing I need to do, looking at here, is right, well, you know, that and that will cancel. Okay, so I'd be left with sine of 7a over a. But on the bottom I really want 2a, so I'd better put a 2 on the bottom there. So now this and this are the same thing. There are two ways of saying the same thing. But this is more useful because now this whole thing here is just 1. By this formula that we have over here, by this law or this rule or whatever you want to call it, this whole thing, the limit as a goes to 0 of sine of an angle over the same angle. So this angle is going to 0 and it's over the same angle. So that whole thing is just 1. So I just end up with 1 multiplied by 7 over 2, which is 7 over 2. In much the same way, you can deal with the reciprocal, so which is when you turn it upside down. So let's say the limit as a tends to 0 of 5a all over sine of 3a. So this formula here works upside down as well. Okay, if sine of an angle over the angle is going to be equal to 1, then when you flip it, it's going to be equal to 1 as well. So for this one, we would write this once again. It's sine of 3a on the bottom, so we want 3a on the top. We need the angles to match. So now this angle and this angle are the same, so this whole thing is going to become 1 in a second. And now we just have to say, well, what do we need to do to this to make it the same as what we started with? And we haven't changed the bottom line, fine. Looking at the top, we have a 3 here that we don't actually want, so we better get rid of it, we better cancel it. Okay, and up here on the top we actually want a 5, so you see, put a 5 on the top. So now if you wanted, you could cancel that 3 and cancel that 3, and you'd be left on the top with 5a and on the bottom sine of 3a. So this and this are the same, but this way of writing it is more useful because this whole thing inside the blue circle here is just 1. So you end up with 1 times 5 over 3, that's just 5 over 3. Alright, so that's your basic idea with limits, and using that we can go on and we can look at slightly more complicated cases. So this question is a little bit like question 3, the limit that you're asked to do there. Now in question 3 you can get the right answer by doing something wrong, so I'm going to just show you the wrong thing that you really are not meant to do. We have formulas for putting together things like this. We have a formula for sine of a plus sine of b, and it's very complicated. So what you cannot do is say that that top line is the same as sine of 7x. Okay, you cannot write down equals sine 7x and then go from there. it may turn out that you end up with the same thing as if you did that, but you are wrong, you're going to get marked wrong. It's not the right way to go about it, and it won't get you the marks. So what you need to do in a case like this is you need to split it up into two separate limits. So this is the limit as x tends to 0, sine of 5x over 4x, plus the limit as x tends to 0, sine of 2x over 4x. And we deal with each of these separately, exactly like the last question. Okay, so you're allowed to split up, but you can split up a top line, no problem. So you split it up, this thing over 4x plus this thing over 4x. Okay, and now looking at this first one here, well, I've sine of 5x on the top, so I want 5x on the bottom, so just write it in. And we'll work out in a second what's going to go there. And for the second one here, I have 2x on the top, so I'll want 2x on the bottom, so just write it in and we'll work out what goes with that. So coming back to the first one, we put in a 5 on the bottom. It's not actually what we have up here, so we better put a 5 on the top line to cancel it. And if that 5 and that 5 cancel, what you're left then with is you're left with x on the bottom. We want 4x, so we better put in a 4 there. So now you can see this whole thing here is going to become 1, so we'll just be left with 5 over 4. Similar kind of a thing over here. We don't want that 2 there, so we'll put a 2 up like that. And now if they cancelled, I'd have x on the bottom, I want 4x, so I'll put a 4 there. You might spot that to go from 2x to 4x, I just need to multiply by 2 on the bottom, leave the top alone, so multiply by 1, so you can just put in 1/2 there, which is the same as 2/4, so it doesn't make a difference which way you do that. And again, the thing in the blue circle is just going to be 1. So this is 1 times 5 over 4 plus 1 times 2/4, so that's equal to 5 over 4 plus 2 over 4, so that's 7 over 4. Oops, missing that. There we go. So 5 over 4 plus 2 over 4, so that's 7 over 4. Now, that is the same answer that you would get if you went back to the start and did it using that mistake that we mentioned. So you will get the same answer if you said, oh, this is the same as sine of 7x. But you would get very little marks for that, and it's completely wrong. So when you're doing these, if you have more than one sign on the top line, you need to split it up and deal with each of them separately. Okay, you cannot add the two of them and say sine 7x over 4x and then work with it.